Hello, everyone, and welcome to What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy. Today we're talking about how to yell less.
Gee, could I use this for the entirety of my life? I'm a yeller, Amy. I'm a yeller.
So am I, or I have been. It gets easier as your kids get older. You're not always living at that level of frantic. But I think we should talk about how to yell less, because how to never yell or lose your temper is not really an achievable goal.
Yeah, I feel like there are people who do the kind of like gentle parenting who would argue that yelling never is somehow an achievable goal. But I mean, that ship has sailed for me. I have a high temperament and I am a yeller, and I have a lot of thoughts about yelling.
Me too. I'm going to come in kind of hot on this one, maybe even a little controversial, but I have receipts, because I think I want to define what yelling is, because I'm going to quote Emily Edlin here. She's a clinical psychologist. She's been on our podcast, as everybody has at this point.
At this point, if they haven't been on our podcast, it's like
Don't
you're
listen
not
to
a
them.
real actor in New York City if you haven't played a dead body on Law and Order. And you're not a real parenting expert if you haven't been on our podcast.
That's
sorry.
Well said. So Emily Edlin, we'll link to her fresh take. She talked about autonomy, creating autonomous kids. And she says, I figured this out first. I want to give myself credit. I was like, I think we're getting this wrong. And then I did find receipts from Emily Edlin. So it's not just me thinking in this. But she says, the way that we describe yelling when we talk about it in parenting circles does not define the behavior consistently.
Correct.
When you want to study a behavior in behavioral science, says Emily Edlin, you have to start with a solid definition, or the results don't mean much.
Correct.
So I think the problem is when it comes to yelling is that we say that yelling, there is nobody, including me, who's going to argue that yelling is better than not yelling. I mean, I think it's like the goal is to yell less, of course. But when we say that all yelling is equally toxic and bad, we're lumping some very different things together. Like, put your shoes on. How many times do I have to tell you to put your shoes on is very different from
you little idiot. You should have never been born.
Yes. And there's a study, as we like to discover, we see a study that supposedly says one thing, and then you scratch it, a little scratch and sniff, and that's not what the study said at all. So there was a study, 2014, Journal of Childhood Development. And this study has been trumpeted everywhere, saying that yelling produces the same results as physical punishment in children.
Scary.
Breaking a child and yelling at them is literally the same thing, and it causes the same levels of anxiety, stress, and depression 10 years later. That's how they're measuring it.
Frightening and scary.
Very frightening, if true. And a lot of us are like, oh my God, if yelling at my child is like that bad for them. But what the study actually studied was not yelling. It examined reciprocal relations between maternal and paternal harsh verbal discipline and adolescents' depressive symptoms a decade later.
So that makes more sense.
It didn't measure how often they raised their voices. It measured harsh verbal discipline. And wouldn't you agree that and yelling, they can go together, but they don't have to go together at all?
Yes, I would agree.
And so I think that we need to give ourselves, starting from the point of like, okay, we're going to yell less because for reasons we'll get into, that it's not that useful anyway or effective anyway. But leave aside that every time you do it, you need to put on the hair shirt and give yourself 100 lashes because it was exactly the same as
punching your kid in the face.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. And I do think on the flip side for myself, of the things I think about the things that I do wrong as a parent and the things that I've really tried to examine as a parent and be better about as a parent, for me, I used to be very hard on myself about how I fed my kids, and now my kids kind of eat anything, and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have worried about that. But for me, I would say my number one, if I were to list, and this sounds harsh, but I'm just going to say it because it explains it, like my number one failure that I see as myself as a parent is that I yell too much. And I think that it took me a long time to realize, both with my spouse and with my children, that I'm scarier than I think I am.
Yeah.
That I often am like, oh my God, could you get in the car? Da, da, da. And then my kids seem upset. And I kind of think, but it's just me. I'm just
Blown off steam.
upset.
Right.
Well, of course I'm upset. The three of you all spilled ice cream at the same time in the new van or whatever it is. But that I forget, I have a story from my childhood that I was in a haunted house, and I was notoriously frightened of haunted houses. And the other thing I was scared the most of in the world was lightning. And so we were in this haunted house in our town that someone had made. It was like a kind of old mansion, and they turned it into a haunted house. And a vampire, was coming out of a room filled with lightning. And I was screaming like eyes roll back in my head.
How old are you?
Probably like 6 or 7,
Okay.
maybe. And the vampire like leaned down and was like, "It's just me, Mr. Callaghan." It was our neighbor who was playing the vampire. And it did nothing to alleviate my fear of the vampire. I was like, the fact that it was my neighbor pretending to be a vampire did not make it any better. And I think of that as the metaphor for like the experience of a child whose parent is yelling at them. Like, it's scary and overwhelming. And I think, guys, you know me. I'm not really that mad. I'm clearly just frustrated that you did X, Y, or Z, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I take my teeth out and I'm like, it's just Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, that's right. Right. It's better to do that than not to do that. It's better that he did that than sent you home thinking vampires are real and they lived on the street.
Yes.
But on the whole, right, maybe don't. I have this in my relationship too. That
Yes.
My spouse will say, "Stop
sure.
yelling at me." I'm like, "I'm not yelling. I'm not yelling. Am I probably expressing some frustration? But we can't always see accurately how we come across. We're delivering messages. You know what this brings me back to? Clever Hans. Never thought I'd reincorporate Clever Hans, but Clever Hans was the horse who could do math.
Right? Clever Hans, the counting horse.
He could count. We talked about him a couple weeks ago. He somehow knew math, and nobody knew how. And it was because if you said, "Clever Hans, what's 6 plus 2?" and it would start to paw what the questioners were delivering to the horse without meaning to, without realizing they were doing it, was raising of the eyebrows and other facial indicators that you were getting towards the right answer. So if a horse is that good at reading positive facial expressions, it makes sense.
Just imagine a
right,
child.
that our kids can see in our negative facial expressions and perhaps intensified non-yelling yells, something that we're not necessarily even intending. Like, I'm annoyed. Yes, I'm really annoyed right now, but that can be perceived as aggressive.
Well, I teach a class actually called personal presentation. It's like a speech class. And when I'm teaching the class, we do an exercise called Mr. Personality. And the exercise is one person goes out of the room and you give them adjective, Mr. or Ms. Personality, it could be. And your adjective is, let's say, depressed.
So everybody knows except you. The audience knows that you're Mr. Depressed, but you don't know you're Mr.
The
Depressed?
opposite. You know you're Mr. Depressed,
okay.
but the audience
doesn't
And
know.
you come
Okay.
back in and the audience asks you questions and they're trying to figure out what your word is. And it's such an interesting exercise in the way that people present themselves because they think they're acting depressed and people are like angry. And it's just like your default body posture is so strong or relaxed. It's very hard to work against your default body posture to get a different emotion through. And I think that especially when I was first having, 3 little kids at the same time and doing a lot of yelling, I think that my default personality might have been like Ms. Screamy, like I just.
I'm picturing those like characters,
Yes,
the round
Little Miss
they're
Screamy.
just circles. Yeah, Little Miss
Yes,
Screamy.
the
There's a
Little
book about
Miss
you?
books.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I feel like I did too much yelling. I still do too much yelling.
So Carla Naumberg, who
We've
been
also
on
had
our
on the
show.
podcast.
Yeah, she's a repeat guest. She's like Alec Baldwin in Saturday Night Live. Yeah, she gets the special jacket. She wrote a book called How to Stop Losing Your Stuff with Your Kids. Use a different word besides stuff. And so she divided this yelling thing into two sort of things: toxic explosions, which I think is what we're talking about, what this study is talking about. Like, yeah, your kid is going to be depressed 10 years later if they grew up in a house with toxic explosions. Nobody wants to do that. We're all doing our best. Let's not do that. But then she talks about what she calls unpredictable and disproportionate reactions, and that
Mm,
those aren't awesome either, right? Where
that's
they're
me.
you're not a
That's
bad
me.
person, but they're not awesome.
I'm not
And
toxic, but I'm unproportional.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
also think, to be fair, a lot of times the other people don't see the proportion. You know what I mean? I find myself saying to my kids, I know you don't love it when I'm yelling, but I have asked you 4 times in a
right,
normal voice.
right.
And so one of the tricks, we won't get into solutions, I've found is trying to say, can you get to the table? Can you get to the table? This is the second time I'm asking you. Can you get to the table? This is the third time I'm asking you. Like trying to give a little vision into why does mom yell all the time? It's like, I asked you nicely 40 other times.
Right. Right. And that's true. And there are times, right, when you do yell, there are times you yell and it certainly is cathartic for you. And there are times when they really need to hear it. Like, um, I don't do this anymore, but I did when my kids were little and all three of them were in the back seat, squabbling in their car seats, sometimes yelling, right? Lots of yelling going on in the car, and I'm like merging onto the West Side
Sure.
Highway, and it's raining, right?
Right.
And I'm like, stop it, stop yelling, stop it! I am driving. You can't do this while I'm driving. And like a little bit of shocked silence from the back seat is gratifying, but it was certainly an unpredictable and disproportionate reaction from where they're sitting in the back seat. They're not merging onto the highway in the rain. They don't understand that driving's dangerous. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
still
But I'm
perceived
also
by
going to
them as like,
argue
what?
pretty strongly that it worked, right?
It
Like
works,
it
right?
works.
It works, but yelling doesn't work when you yell too often.
Right.
And so, we'll talk about that. Like, what are all the reasons that yelling is not particularly effective anyway? Because unfortunately, it isn't for 10 reasons, even if it can feel really cathartic in the moment while you're doing it. And sometimes, yes, you deserve to let off steam. You don't have to be a saint, but it doesn't necessarily get you closer to what you want or the behavior you want your
I mean,
kids
I
to.
definitely believe that. I never get in bed at night and think, I wish I had yelled more today. That is
Right.
never a thought. I did when I was younger and had younger kids. I would occasionally say, oh, I have the yelling flu, which meant I was like hoarse and tired from yelling so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really mean, I mean, I wasn't screaming at the top of my lungs at my kids all day. It was kind of, it just felt, I think that the volume of our whole lives was at that point. Watch out, be careful, go, you could do whatever. It just felt like our whole lives kind of existed at that pitch,
Yeah.
which I think in some ways, I know from studies that they talk about what is really difficult and causes PTSD is environments where there's a lot of violence or like bombs are coming in or whatever is going
Unpredictability.
on.
Right.
That the reality of that situation is that it's just calm and then explosions and then
Mm.
calm and then explosions. And that it's the unknowing of when it's coming next. It's the uncertainty of what's going to happen during the explosion. The explosion is going to be scary. You don't know when it's coming. And that state is one of the hardest human states for anybody to exist in. And
Right.
certainly, I'm not making a straight comparison between yelling and being bombed, but I think the vibe of there's an explosive person in the house and I don't know what's going to set them off is it's very understandable why that's damaging for
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah. Not something that you want to raise your kids within. And I would argue having that life with little kids is really stressful all the
All
time.
the
And
time.
you can start to feel like I just saw something on Instagram of a mom like going out into her backyard and just like face planting into the grass. It's like touching grass to remember that I'm not being chased by a lion. I'm just trying to get 3 kids on the school bus.
Right.
Like that's it. That we live in this sort of bath of constant low grade stress, and maybe that's what we need to focus on instead of like bad person, you yelled 4 times today and you should have yelled 0. Let's talk about how to like dial down the stress.
All right, let's take a break. And when we come back, let's talk about why yelling happens, Amy.
Well, good news, everyone. Yelling is a biological imperative. I mean, we yell to get
We
attention.
never did get
Babies
a
cry to get our
biological imperative
attention.
theme, but we should have.
Yeah, it's that we're hardwired to push people's buttons when we want a reaction from them, and yelling can work when there's a bear chasing you, or when there's a bear chasing your friend and they don't know yet. Yelling is extremely effective when you're about to get in an accident because you can't think because your kids are yelling. Yelling might be the thing you need to do in that moment, but we over apply it and it becomes
And
remarkably ineffective.
I had a pediatrician tell me when my children were young, and this sticks with me to this day. Child's favorite toy is a Jack in the Box. Wind it up, and you don't know when, but it's going to pop. And like that is a child's interaction with the world to a certain point. And, you know, British people say, don't wind me up, like winding you up. It's like you're winding up a Jack in the Box to watch them pop, you know?
Right. But you are the Jack in the Box and the kid is doing the winding. And
You are
that,
the Jack in the Box.
right.
So that's what
and
he was
you're being
saying
manipulated
is
by the
like
kid. Right.
the the only thing you can control is not being the Jack in the Box because, I mean, I now have high schoolers who I am constantly trying to say, you know, if you ignored some of the behavior that is annoying you, they would do it less. You know, I mean, the kids who are bothering you, and because they know if they come over and say this phrase to you, you're going to explode and yell at them. They're literally winding you up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Alan Kasdan, he's a child psychiatrist at the Yale Child Study Center, and he says about yelling, if the goal of the parent is catharsis, like I said before, that I want to get this out of my system and I want to show you how mad I am, yelling is definitely the way to go. It's the best way
Yes.
to show everybody how mad you are.
Yes.
But if your goal is to change something the child is doing or get the child to start doing something else, yelling is not the best way to achieve those ends.
Yeah,
It
I think
doesn't
that's
serve the purpose.
exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely get a little tweet with like, let's work this out together. Tell me
Right.
why you're so frustrated.
Right.
Like, I'm definitely so hardwired as like an Irish immigrant, you know, mom that's like, I just hit you with the spoon and keep making my dinner, you know?
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I don't hit my children with spoons. Don't write to me. But I do think that if you find yourself in the cycle of yelling, the Jack in the Box cycle, it is definitely worth in calmer times investigating what is underneath that.
Yes, I agree with that because when you think about it, when you yell about something, if you really think about the times that set you off, I would argue you're probably not yelling all day long about everything. You tend to yell about the same things.
There
And
you
they
go.
are the things that make you yell because you have to keep saying them, right?
Yes.
And that is worth circling. For me, back in the day, the we are late for the bus, we're late for the bus. That was the yelling time, right? 5 minutes before we have to leave,
Yes.
and everybody has 20 minutes of things
And
they have to do
every
before
day,
we leave.
right? Like every day.
Why are we doing this every day, right? And you're bringing all of that frustration and very well earned frustration and concern, and you don't want to have to drive them again because you missed the bus. Like, you're right, you're right to be frustrated and annoyed. You're right that this is stressful. But if you're yelling about that same thing, the thing you have to fix is not that you yell, you have to fix the thing.
Exactly.
You have to fix the situation, right? Which I have told this story before in different contexts, but it really helped for me. The reason that it was hard for us to get out the door in the morning is that my three kids would go upstairs to brush their teeth after having breakfast. And who knew what, like new continents were formed while they were upstairs doing whatever. And then I'd be yelling for them to come down, hurry up. And then at least one of them would come down not having brushed their teeth or gotten their socks. They didn't even go up. They didn't even do the things they went upstairs to do. The frustration about that was through the roof. The fix was not me yelling more. The fix was getting downstairs toothbrushes and putting toothpaste and toothbrushes both upstairs and downstairs. So nobody had to go upstairs to brush their teeth anymore. And the thing that took 15 minutes all of a sudden took 2 minutes, and we started leaving for school on time. Was it a forever fix? No. But feeling bad about myself wasn't the way to stop yelling in the morning. It was to fix the reason it was stressful.
Yeah. And I think that this is the reigning piece of advice. Someone told me when I was pregnant, and I must have said it 10,000 times since then, but it applies to your example, which is the phrase is saying no means standing up.
Yeah.
And like when you try to parent from the couch, which is extremely understandable, but it's something my husband and I would say to each other all the time, that the two boys are starting to wrestle and they're, kind of maybe having fun, but there's a sharp corner and you pretty much know it's going to end in
know what's
tears
going to happen.
or
right.
an ER visit. And you've just sat down with your like bowl of chili that you've been looking forward to for an hour. And you want to just start screaming, cut it out, cut it out, cut it out. And they're having fun. So they're ignoring you. That this, I think, cuts down for me on a huge percentage of yelling. And it's the upstairs, downstairs thing too.
Mm-hmm.
That we have an upstairs and we have a basement where the kids play video games. And the way our house is designed is extremely annoying for reasons I won't get into here. I'm going to start a whole architecture podcast to talk about how annoyingly designed my house is. But the kids are like off to the sides and upstairs. So from where I stand downstairs, I can scream at the top of my lungs and they can't really hear me.
They can't hear you.
Cannot. No, it's like they're kind of far in their corners.
Oh, okay.
And now my kids all like music. So they have music playing in the rooms and whatever else is going on. But now I find a lot of my yelling is screaming upstairs, it's dinner time. And we really did at some point put walkie-talkies in people's rooms so that I just call them on the walkie-talkie.
That's really
because
smart.
It's just that kind of, where are you? We're supposed to be leaving. And sometimes they're like, what are you so mad about? It's just dinner. I'm like, I have been calling you for 45 seconds at increasingly loud volumes. Right. And I think that, we don't want to jump to solutions in part 2, but again, that's the same, like, what is causing this yelling? And I think you see it so much at Thanksgiving, holidays, family gatherings. Mm-hmm. 10 different people are yelling different instructions to the kids, or yelling at them. Look at the toy you got. And it's like, it's just the yelling of, I just want to stay on the couch with my cocktail. Stop touching your brother. Whatever it is. I'm comfortable where I am. So I'll just scream loud enough that you stop doing it, as opposed to standing up and just separating the two of you.
It's such a good point. And it sort of undercuts what we were saying in the first part about, like, every time you yell at your children, you are ruining their future.
You're
right?
not. Yeah.
That when you're all in the room and like, stop touching your brother, that sort of hollering that happens, nobody would argue that that's a better way to live than peace and harmony. But there's no world in which your kid does anything but happily ignore that. And Correct. That's the problem with yelling, right? Is that the more you yell, the more you need to yell, because your kids can get pretty good at tuning it out. Like, your kids finally like, what are you yelling about? But they could ignore the first 40 seconds pretty well. It used to drive me nuts. Like, if you hear me yelling up the steps and it's after 6 p.m., it's dinner time. Like, that's why I'm calling you.
Put it together,
you don't
people.
hear me. Right.
Yeah.
And stop making me come up the stairs to get you every night. Why do you think I'm calling you?
It's a new day. You're what?
Yeah.
I know. I do. We do have the rule now. If you hear your voice, you step out of your room. If you're in the basement, you step to the top of the stairs.
That's good.
Like, that's the rule, because I'm not going to have screaming conversations up and down the stairs.
Right. And maybe involving your kids in, like, let's not do this, right? Like, this isn't fun for anybody, so let's do this. But the more you yell, the more you need to yell.
Yes.
And it's because they know that it's just part of it, and they don't have to listen until you really yell. Like, they know you're kind of mean at yell, and you're, now I'm really mad, yell, and they can just wait. They can just wait it out.
And to be fair to kids, and I do think about this sometimes, let's say it's like 6 o'clock at night, I'm cold. I decide I'm going to just like sit in my rocking chair that's in my room, pull my blanket on top of me, put my feet on my little footsie rest that's just the right size, open my Kindle, and like have some me time. Someone then screams my name. I'm like, what? I'm not jumping to my feet and being like, yes, Captain, what is it? I'm stand at the ready. And I do think that kids are so out of control with their lives that I can sometimes identify with the fact that, whatever they're doing, they're like, often I yell upstairs, what are you doing? And they say, petting the cat. And it's like, okay, they're just laying on the floor petting the cat. I guess I wouldn't want someone shrieking to me, come get these shoes off the dining room table or whatever it
Right.
is.
Right. Well, the studies do seem to show that kids who get yelled at more yell at each other more. I mean, it's just sort of a model behavior
Yeah.
thing, and you can have a yelly house, which again is just it's better not to have one, I think. And it's
I'm going to just push back to say that the set point volume of different houses is always very different.
that's true.
And I think that you made a distinction, hollering versus yelling. Let's
Yes.
use those two terms.
Yes, hollering. Right, hollering is we are going to be late.
Hollering is like, tell your brother to come in. It's
Right,
dinner time.
right,
You know, that was, I don't know what accent I was trying to do there, but
Who is
like,
that?
I don't know.
What kind of family is that?
But
Yeah,
I do think about being in like big, crazy, this is what I call the hollow from Harry Potter, like the Weasley's house. Like, it just feels like there's like flying chickens at some points and like everyone's kind of at a loud volume, but it feels very loving and safe. And hey, girls, come down, help with the gravy. You, da, da, da. Whatever it is, that kind of loud volume of a house is a lot of hollering. And,
Yes.
and I think, existing at that volume of, I mean, I worked in a lot of kitchens in my life. My family's in the restaurant business and I waited tables for a long time. And like that kitchen vibe of like, get in here, you got to pick up. Like that is just a volume that I feel very comfortable at. Like a lot of hollering, I'm fine with.
Yep. I have two thoughts on that. The difference is that there's no frustration behind it, or little frustration, or loving frustration.
Yes.
Like how many times I have to tell you get to take the garbage out, like that.
Right.
That's loving mild frustration, and it's also we're arguing in these houses. It's constant. It's not unpredictable. That's how they roll.
Right. It's
So it doesn't
always
feel
at
unsafe.
that volume.
Yeah.
And I think there's certainly people. I mean, it's always funny when you get married and stuff, and it's like, whoa, we do things really different. Even we were Irish growing up. We had one set of Italian cousins, and they were like, they just lived at a completely different volume than our house,
Yeah.
And I think that is different than. I think you're right. Yelling is frustration and anger behind it. Hollering is kind of maybe mild frustration, but mostly like good-natured, high volume. Even if it's a little bit like, you forgot your burger, you idiot, for table 24, but it's not, it doesn't have that toxicity and that anger behind it that makes it scary.
Right.
Let's take a break. We're going to come back and focus on advice and solutions.
So I have a friend, Elizabeth Robinson. She is a dog trainer, and it is one of like my top 3 pieces of parenting advice. And it's funny because she's not a parent, she's a dog trainer, but she was training my dog Marshmallow, and she was a puppy with
Marshy.
my little kids around. Marshy's still with us, even though my kids aren't little. Marshy's old too. She's 12, so that's like 84, right? She's old.
Elderly.
Pretty well trained. And my kids were all very eager when we first got her, and they'd be like, sit, Marshmallow, sit, Marshmallow, sit, that kind of thing. And she's like, we're not going to do that. We don't do that, because when you say, Marshmallow, sit, Marshmallow, sit, she thinks that's the command, and she's going to wait until you've said it 10 times because you've taught her that that's how it goes. That you say it 10 times and then she obeys. So what you need to do is you need to say it once, and then I want you to count to 10 or whatever she said to my kids. And of course, dogs do this. I mean, I do know this now as a dog owner. Sometimes you think they haven't heard you. You say something. If you just wait long enough, they will react. They'll do it, but they don't
Well,
react
they also
as
have the
quickly as we
clever
do.
hands thing where they're looking at you like, are you serious?
Yes. Yeah. Do you mean, oh, mommy means yes. I think about this every day, even as I fall short on it over and over again. If you teach your kids, we have to go, where are you? Put your shoes on. If that's like part of your morning routine, that mom yells for 10 minutes and then she really yells and then we leave, then that's what it will be.
Yeah. One solution that we have really found for this in my house, because we have talked about Elizabeth Robinson before and this idea, and I'm like, oh, That is something I do. And man, once you hear it, you'll see it all the time. You'll be at the playground. You'll see the mom who's like, let's go. All right, come on, let's go. Come
One,
on,
two,
let's
three. I
go.
said, let's go. No, I really mean it. No,
Now,
you're not going to
really,
get ice cream.
let's go. You're not going to get ice cream. Christmas is canceled. You don't come now. Let's go.
Right now.
I love that everybody's got a
20
Bronx
minutes
accent.
later.
And then you're like, oh, you're doing the thing. That's not the, and I mean, I'm not saying it to, listen, if anyone watched me parent in public, they would have reams of notes for me, I'm sure. I'm not judging in a tough way, but it's like, oh, that's that thing that we all do. And
you're just teaching your kid to ignore you.
You're teaching your kid to ignore you. And one of the things that works really well with this is setting the rule beforehand. Amy would call it the lady. We had a timer, the duck. Oh, the duck's going off. It's time to go. And that's it. The duck rules the day. We don't do 10 versions. Even with my older kids now, we don't have buses in our town, so we have to drive our kids. And I think the first class starts at 8:03. And, you know, we found that we were having a lot of, it's 3 kids all getting out the door at the same time. And it's, you know, high school and middle school. So a little bit more like, do you have every single piece of paper? Do you have this? Do you have that? And I found myself yelling and yelling and yelling and yelling and yelling. And eventually I said, the car leaves at 7:50 every morning. Hope you're in the car. Otherwise, you have to walk to school. You figure it out. It's 2.5 miles. It's real cold. You figure it out. And like, what was the consequence? I'm not exactly sure. I guess if they had said, like, I guess I'm not ready, too bad. I mean, I wouldn't have really I don't know what would have happened, but we never kind of got there. Once I said the car leaves at 7:50, that's the only thing I'm saying. And then at 7:50, I say 7:50. Walk downstairs, turn on the car. My husband often drives, get in the car. And then sometimes, you know, people are still running down the stairs at 7:51, 7:52, but they've really bought into this idea of the bus leaves at 7:50, not because you're on it, because that's what time it leaves.
Yeah.
And when I find myself in the morning, you haven't gotten in the shower yet? What are you doing? I thought you wanted to take a shower. Blah, blah. I find myself right away. I just say, 7:50, just remember. And that's it. It's not my problem whether or not you take a shower or you get breakfast or whatever. Now, my kids are older and they're able to have more responsibility.
They can put on their own shoes. Right.
But, you know, they're not easy and they're not organized and they're not, you know, marching off like the Captain Van Trapp's kids in the Sound of Music. But making a higher ask part of it can get you away from the 400 asks. And it can be, dinner starts at 6, or, you know, I text all the kids, dinner is at 6:15, come to the table then. And we just start dinner. And for some weird reason, they're like, well, I can't be late for dinner. You started without me. And it takes it out of this power dynamic of like, I can show mom, or I don't have to listen until she calls for the 7th time because this game is really great. It's dinner starts at 6:15. We're going to start to eat.
It's at least removing the yelling, because my kids are older now too. And I'm thinking about like the times when we leave for the airport and like, we have to go, we were supposed to go 10 minutes ago, that kind of thing. And I just start leaving and waiting outside. And one of my kids is like, you can't do that, because when like the other kid, they said that makes them want to go even slower when you're waiting outside. It's like, but I'm not waiting outside to make them go fast. Like, I'm waiting outside to not be the jack in the box, right? Like I can't stand there and watch you pet the dog instead of putting your coat on. So I'm going to just be outside. I'll be ready. And my dad used to do the same thing. He drove me to school every morning and he'd be out in the driveway warming up the car. But I think it was also like he couldn't deal with it. Like, where's my shoes? Where's my homework? Like, it just was, we have an agreement. I'm in the car. And I, you know, most of the time would get out the door on time.
And I feel like really strongly this is a double solve. It's the solve of yelling less, making yourself less agitated, making yourself less crazy. But it is also the solve of your kid figuring out independence and time management. And, you know, when you hover over your kid, and by you, to be clear, I mean me, hovering over, and now you do this, and now you put your shoes on, put your other shoe on, now grab your backpack. You are providing every step of that, and you are unknowingly setting up a system where if you don't provide every step of it, your kids really don't know how to do the steps on their
Mm,
own. And not for nothing, it is a huge life skill to know if I have to leave the house at 7:50, I need to set an alarm for 6:45. I need to get in the
right.
shower by 7 o'clock. I can lay in my warm, cozy bed. Then I have about 6 minutes to shower and get clean because then I got to brush my teeth. Then I got to, it, time management, if someone is screaming every step at you the whole time, I mean, we have this at work all the time. Like, okay, tag you're it. I need you to figure out this problem. Get back to me with a solution, not I'm going to now walk you through every step of this problem.
Right.
Otherwise, I should just do it myself.
You're solving the source of the stress and the tension that's making
Yes.
you yell, because yelling was never going to solve it anyway. And so then, yes, you're solving the solution, and you're yelling less along the way because you solved the stress, not the personality flaw that you yell too much.
Can I take a kind of random left on this and ask you a question that I genuinely don't know the answer to?
Sure.
I have a child who is extremely sensitive to yelling. And this child will say, like, I just can't stand being yelled at. And I was the same. I mean, I guess nobody loves being yelled at,
Yeah.
but
And what being yelled at is, your mileage may vary, right? I'm sure
for
this
sure.
kid would say some things are yelling, you're yelling at me. It's like, "No, I wasn't at all." But the perception is there. Okay.
So I'm a little lost in this idea right now that is that worth working on? I think of myself, and I'm going to say this is my daughter because I think gender is an issue in this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Is developing any kind of toughness about yelling without, torturing someone, or I just worry sometimes that women are, at least in 2024, they're not born that way, whatever's going on with conditioning,
Mm-hmm.
that the intolerance of getting in trouble or being yelled at or having people be mad at you, it gets in the way at work and in other places and in dating. And I worry, but is that a variable or a constant? Like, can it be fixed? Is there any value in a conversation? So we were just talking about it the other day, and I thought, I don't want you to go through life again, like your mind goes to these big places, going through life adjusting your behavior so that other people aren't mad at you or don't yell at you. Like, often the person yelling at you is just a total jerk, and like,
Right.
you're right. But is there a way to build up a resistance, maybe especially in young girls, to say, you
Right,
can
that person's a
take
jerk. Right,
yelling. That person is
yeah.
a jerk. And I understand the sensitivity. I mean, the feel. If I get yelled at, even in traffic, I hold on to it for like a month. I'm like, and then the person yelled at me, and I wasn't even in the wrong. I had my blinker on all the time. Is it possible to build up a resistance to yelling, Amy?
Yeah, I guess so. But then you have this sort of like thick outer skin, and then you're going to therapy for that. I mean, I think you're right, though. We have to teach our kids, and especially our daughters, that sometimes people are just jerks, and that somebody's, display of emotion
Doesn't
is
get to
not
win.
yours to fix. It doesn't get to win. And it's also, you don't have to stay until they understand, but you didn't mean it actually, or you're a good person actually, or you didn't see that they were trying to make a left turn actually. Like, you can let them feel the way they feel, and let that roll off your back and go about your day. You don't want that in your relationship with your kid.
Right.
Right. Like, if in your own house, it's like, okay, if you really don't like being yelled at and you're perceiving, let's talk about the sources of stress. I don't want you to feel like you're being yelled at too much. Let's talk about, because it's really, let's look at it. It's really about these same two things. It's about, I think your room's a mess and you think it's fine, right? That's what and the other thing is, that you're late for soccer every week. Let's fix those two things. And then I think they could participate in that. And then in real life, I think you're right. And it's something that kids need to learn. I'm not sure that it's worse now than it used to be.
No, I don't think so. I just think I wish there was some way to like inoculate girls against the feeling of, if someone's yelling, I must be wrong. And if someone's I mean, I just have had that. Just like, But obviously I was not suggesting I'm going to yell more at my daughter so that she gets tougher.
Right.
Like it's not my style. I don't believe in it, but it did cross my mind, and it's something maybe we can explore that a little bit in another episode.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Are you mad at me?
are you mad at me? And
Okay.
can we
Putting it on the
just
list.
take that question
Right.
off of people's lists? And
Right.
I don't know. I haven't been able to do it for myself, so
All right.
I
Well,
can't
that's
imagine.
I can't wait to have that conversation.
That's going to
Let
be
me
a
just
good
say that.
one.
Emily Edlin, the psychologist, had a couple of things to keep in mind about yelling, and
Hit
I
me.
think this is very useful. Less for a solution than a like, is this a problem and how do I know when it's a problem? I thought these were great. She says, keep in mind the content of the yelling does have more impact than the volume. Never insult, name call, demean, or threaten the safety of a child. That's verbal abuse.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what your volume is. Okay, and I think we tried to start by saying that today, and I hope we were clear about that.
Yes.
That what did they call it? Intense verbal discipline is not what we're talking about. She also says that when it comes to yelling, frequency matters. If a parent or a child feels like yelling is the regular tone of the house, that is not a home of safety and connection.
Yeah.
This is Emily speaking. She says, if anyone in the family feels like parents are, quote, always yelling, that actually needs to be addressed.
That is a great touchstone.
Yeah.
Great touchstone. And I think there were probably points in my parenting journey where my kids would have said, Mom is always yelling, for sure.
Yep.
And I do. I mean, I regret it. And I do think, listen, life is hard and parenting is hard. And I think my kids are okay. And I think that they will remember, a lot of happiness and stuff. But I wish I had yelled less. I wish I had.
The third thing that she says to keep in mind is watch your child. How do they look when you yell? If a child appears fearful, there's a problem. When a child's fear center becomes activated, it fires up a fight or flight nervous system, and that's not how we want our children to feel around us. If your child looks scared, that is a signal to immediately stop. No nuance in that, she says.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
And I can count on one hand the times that my kids actually looked scared. And I was like, oh, forget it. I'm sorry. It's
Mr. Callaghan. It's Mr. Callaghan.
Right. The Mr. Callaghan move, which, as we said, is better to not be the scary person, but definitely better to repair,
take your teeth out and be like,
yeah,
you're fine.
Exactly. Mom's having a bad day, and boy, I took it out on you, and boy, was that unfair. And can I give you a hug? I'm so sorry. I've
done that,
and I'm gonna try to do better.
I can't even count how many times. I'm really sorry. I definitely lost control there, guys. I'm sorry.
It's crucial when you lose your temper, and I think it really matters. And I do think that is a step that generations of yesteryear left behind, right?
Yeah.
Like there was yelling and then it all went back to neutral.
Yeah.
Right? Like terse ceasefire.
Right.
Right? You're like, make sure there's nothing else out here. And it's that unpredictability that you don't want your kids to feel. So if you yell at them because you're a human being and you were frustrated, give them that repair and that sense of safety so they don't walk around with that primary unpredictability feel that is really where the problem starts.
Amy, we have solved it. We have solved
great.
Yelling.
You'll
Could
never yell
this
again.
Episode 15 years ago, but listen, better late than never.
Happy to Help is coming out next month, and I would love to do your book club. If you have a book club, if you'd like to create a book club to read Happy to Help, I would love to come do a Zoom or a Google Meet with your book club and talk about the book. Go to hello@amywilson.com, send an email to the team and tell us, that you'd like to have me come and talk to your book group, and we'll set it up. I would love to do it.
Oh my gosh, how much would you love to have Amy zooming into your living room? I'm going to set one up myself. And with that, folks, thanks so much for listening. Go pre-order Happy to Help, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks, everybody.